Hey folks, greetings from the Offensive Security Group here at Secure IT 360, coming at you with another episode of the Cyber Threat Perspective. Got none other than Tyler Roberts on the show today. It's been a couple, I feel like it's been a couple episodes, but maybe it's because I was gone for a while and then like you did one
hmm
and I think a DMARC one or a DNS one.
hmm Yeah,
Um,
me and Brad had that DMARC one, I think,
yeah,
a few weeks ago.
yep. So for everybody listening, this is episode, I think like 132 or 33 or something like that. Um, let me check because I don't want to be a liar. Yeah, this is going to be 133. So depending on when you start listening to the podcast, I'd be curious to know for those listening, when you started listening around like what episode. I think I'm going to rehash some of our older episodes or kind of redo them or refresh them. So be on the lookout for that. But for this episode, we're talking about session hijacking, session stealing credentials. And I'm going to let Tyler kind of break it down and share what he's thinking about for this episodes. But this is going to be a good one. This is going to be very topical. This is top of mind for everyone when it comes to like rogue apps and OAuth attacks or OAuth abuse rather, and just Microsoft 365 account compromise and business email compromise and all those other compromises in the cloud and identities. So Tyler, let us know what this is about.
Awesome. So in depth on credential stealing and session hijacking. The original thought for this episode came when I saw our security operations center that we have here at Secure IT 360. They implemented a new rule that checks for specific dangerous user agents. And that rule has helped them be proactive in stopping multiple business email compromises for some of our monitored clients. And so it kind of got me thinking, how many other people are aware of some of these dangerous user agents? And, the landscape of session hijacking has advanced and evolved so much that we're now seeing, complete session cookies just being stolen from a link click. So, the attacks are evolving, they're getting more dangerous. And, with that, kind of just want to discuss what the attacks are, how to identify them, and, kind of how to keep yourself safe.
Yeah, absolutely. And we just did an episode, Brad and I did an episode on a review of the Mandiant M Trends 2025 report. And in that, there's a couple sections related to exploitation and related to cloud. And in both of those sections, credential compromise, phishing were top categories for initial infection vector. And for anybody who's on the kind of the internal IT side or security side, or if you're an MSP, you probably have some visibility into these, right? And it's jokingly said that like 60% of statistics are made up, but it's no doubt that credentials are a big target for threat actors. That identities are a big target, and I said this before, but I think it's worth repeating is that nowadays, threat actors don't necessarily need to hack your organization or use a 0-day or an exploit. They just log in, right? They steal a session, they steal a cookie, and they log in. Or they steal the cookies from, info stealer malware that's been, collected in these dumps. So lots of statistics to kind of indicate that this is a rising trend and something we should be aware of, which is why we're bringing it to you and kind of talking through this kind of thing. So, Tyler, I think maybe like level set on what credential theft is, what cookie stealing is, what these session hijack, session theft things are, and we'll kind of go from there.
Yeah, so credential thefts, cookie stealing, your most common vector is going to be phishing or malware that comes from phishing. So credential theft is going to be, similar to what the name is, stealing credentials, and that'll be usernames, passwords, that can be MFA tokens, just depending on what the phish is and what its intent is to do. Cookie stealing is a little bit different. After you establish a session to, let's just say Outlook, for example, you get a session cookie. And that session cookie allows you to stay logged in to that application. And you can even open an additional Outlook tab in your browser and you won't have to relog in. That's because of that session token. So that allows you to be connected to Outlook for a specified amount of time. And so cookie stealing is art of stealing that session token and then being able to masquerade authentication as that user using their token.
And the cookies is kind of interesting to me because when you log into a website, right? And it's like, hey, do you want to be reminded, or do you want to always be logged in, right? That's famous for Microsoft.
Yep.
Or some of the websites say like, how long do you want your authenticator to, or how long do you want to trust this browser, right? From like an MFA standpoint, those cookies that get set allow you to essentially bypass that authenticator if you log in from the same device, right? Like we see that all the time when you log into applications. So it's interesting to me, how those work from a web app perspective or from an application perspective, because again, those session cookies are essentially just a one-way ticket to logging into somebody's account. And we did an episode, it's episode 101. So 101, it was all dedicated around info stealers. And we talked about the different types of info stealer malware and what that ecosystem looks like. But cookies are one of the primary things that this info stealer malware or these info stealer malwares kind of go after because of that reason, right? If I can just steal your cookies to your bank account or to Facebook or to Microsoft, I don't need your password, right? I can just steal your cookies right from your browser and then I can log in, right?
Yeah, and it's also an MFA bypass. If somebody steals your cookie, your MFA protections don't apply because that session's already been established. MFA has already been passed for that session token. So once you steal that cookie, you're in. Like you don't have to get that user's MFA method. So extremely efficient, extremely dangerous methods there.
Yeah. Now with these, there's various attacks that you mentioned. So we should probably like walk through some of the attacks of what this might look like to a defender or to somebody who's kind of like looking for it, right? You've got phishing, you mentioned man in the middle attacks, and then you mentioned exploitation of like vulnerabilities to steal certain credential material. So maybe we should go through that and kind of talk through, as a defender, or if you're an IT admin or a security analyst, or even, like an IT director, what are the things you should be thinking about, and how do these attacks get manifested in the real world?
Yeah, so phishing emails, and it's not specific to emails anymore either. There's certain settings that you can set in Teams that allow you to receive and send messages outside your organization. So some of what we've seen recently is instead of threat actors sending emails, they'll send Teams messages. And that's a lot more concerning for end users because they're not trained as well to identify, hey, attackers can message me directly on Teams. So that's another, form of phishing there is Teams, email, man in the middle. So if you're on an unencrypted network, somebody sniffs traffic, that's another way that they can grab session information or just plain text credentials, depending on the encryption of the network you're on. And then specific for vulnerabilities, some such as cross-site scripting that would allow you to, generate your own payloads. Depending on the type of cross-site scripting would make this more or less dangerous, but that's definitely an avenue as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think what's interesting to me is that it's mostly it's mostly subtle to the end user, right? And I think that's part of the dangerous part is when you steal a session, right? Like if you say you click on a phishing link and you try to log in and then that session is passed to the threat actor, right? Most of the time that's pretty like hidden to the end user. They don't necessarily know it's happening. Whereas with, ransomware or actual phishing emails that say like, hey, download this file, those tend to be a little bit more obvious or a little bit more, telltale signs, I would say. So I think, these phishing attacks where you use a man in the middle attack to trick a user to sign in and then to pass that session along to you are pretty tricky.
Yeah, it's very, like you said, innocuous to the end user because if you just have a username and password and you send an MFA prompt after a threat actor attempts to log in, the end user is going to get that. And that's a red flag for them. But if you're bypassing that completely, there's really no tell that, somebody has your information or is in your account actively.
Yep. Now, what happens next? Like, let's say an attacker steals a session cookie. What does that typically look like after the fact? And I think it'd probably be helpful to maybe move on to, the phishing kits, like you mentioned here in the notes of like, so first off, like, what is the impact, right? Like, what is the end result of this? And then maybe talk through some of the phishing kits that are out there in the wild and how we can start looking for those or detecting those.
Sure. So I think there's two types of risks that can be applied here. Direct risk to the business and a financial aspect, and then a reputational risk to the business. Threat actors have different intentions based on who the threat actor is. Some are motivated by money. And in that case, if there's any sensitive information in email, like financial information, that could be a point of attack. So business email compromised in that way. If you host any sensitive files in repositories such as SharePoint, that can be another avenue for an attacker getting information. And if there's any sensitive information there, that's going to cost, your organization money. But then there's a reputational risk where an end user could get in that account, start sending out emails as that user posing under that organization and cause reputational impact to the organization, which is also, carries a financial burden as well.
Yep. Now, these phishing kits, you wanted to mention and kind of talk about these phishing kits. There are a number of, phishing kits out there, from EvilGenix to Tycoon MFA, which you mentioned in the notes here and kind of like at the top of the episode. And there are others, right? And the whole purpose is to kind of automate or streamline this attack process, this session theft, token theft process. So maybe give us some context around, what these phishing kits are and what they're used for.
Yeah, modern phishing kits are super, super, super automated. They're modular. They're really easy to use. That's the entire point of them. Hackers are some of the laziest people you'll probably meet. They want the easiest way to get what they want. So the tools that they build kind of reflect that. My main concern was Tycoon MFA. Mainly the one that I keyed in on for this episode, because Tycoon MFA is a session stealer. So real world scenario that happened, an end user got a Teams message. It was a link, I think from somebody posing as a supervisor or coworker. So they got that Teams message. They clicked on the link. The link took them to a page. They didn't log into anything, but just from them clicking that link, that information was extracted. And that attacker signed in to their email. And when that attacker signed into the email, the user agent that Tycoon MFA uses is called Axios. And that's a user agent that we key in on because it's more often bad than it is good in the use cases that we see. Because in most organizations, user agents you're going to see are Chrome user agents or Internet Explorer, Firefox, which are all legitimate. So when you start seeing non-standard ones, that's when you start to pay attention. So that was a proactive stop on that one. Sessions were revoked, and that was a good catch at the end of the day. But it is important to take note of different user agents that are non-standard, and even having rule sets around those to help be proactive in those catches. Because if you're bypassing MFA, an attacker is just in that account for however long you allow them to be until you pick up on that activity. So there's no failed logins, right? So you can't capture it off that. So identifying these attacks is a bit tricky if you're not looking at certain information that's static across them, such as user agent.
Yeah, and when we do BEC investigations, that's something that we will key in off of from an investigation standpoint is, we'll look at the user's logins, their logs, right? And their login requests in whatever log system we have. It's Microsoft, or whatever platform we're kind of investigating that BEC on. We'll look at the logs and we'll try to pull out IP addresses, user agent strings, operating system names, things like that to kind of identify what a typical login looks like for this user or users. And then we'll key in on, those strange user agents, strange IP addresses or operating systems. And a lot of times you'll be able to identify kind of what stands out because of that user agent string. So that's something I've used before when doing instant response and particularly BEC, especially in Entra, is keying on that user agent string to identify what's normal, what's not normal. So knowing, it's kind of like Active Directory in many ways with permissions. I equated to that. It's one of those things you have to know where to look and what to look for.
Mm-hmm.
You have to know what is an abnormal user agent string. And the only way to really do that is to kind of get a baseline or an understanding of what that looks like in your environment, which admittedly can be pretty difficult, right? It can be hard to kind of identify what's normal and not normal. But that is a good way to kind of start weeding out some of these phishing kits, at least from an out of the box standpoint, right? Because many threat actors will just fire up, the defaults for these phishing kits and not change them. It's similar to when pen testers and red teamers use GoPhish, right? There are certain signatures in GoPhish email headers, in like the landing pages and stuff like that indicate that it's a GoPhish server and things. So those are things you can key in on to help identify those things, which I think are really helpful.
Yeah, and I think that's something that's going to be really important going forward, just because of how much they're evolving. The more automated module they become, the easier it is for them to use. And eventually it's going to get to a point where everybody's, it's not just going to be one person that they're attempting to phish. It's going to be a group, because it's going to be easy to just send messages or emails to that many users at one time and it fly under the radar.
Yeah, and that's why identity threat detection response, ITDR, is exploding right now. There's a number of vendors that are coming out with offerings for ITDR to detect these kinds of things, to detect session theft and token theft, these session stealing phishing kits. When this happens in Entra or AWS or Google or whatever your platform is, and that's becoming the big buzzword of the year, right? Like zero trust or AI. ITDR is going to be one of those things, and there's tremendous value behind it. But just something I've noticed as a trend is a lot of people jumping on this bandwagon to try and solve this problem, and rightfully so. Microsoft is also trying to solve these problems with conditional access. It's something we've talked about in the past across a number of episodes, and I think every time we do, we always speak very fondly of conditional access because of the things that you can use to help mitigate this kind of thing, which we can probably get to once we get more down into like mitigation strategies. I want to mention a couple things, but is there anything more about user agents or kind of detection for those phishing kits that you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, we can go into what user agents are. For anybody that doesn't know, a user agent is just an identifying piece of the client software that's initiating a network request. So when your browser makes a request to a server, your user agent is indicative of where that information is coming from. So a user agent tells the receiving server, hey, this guy is coming from Google Chrome, and I know this because of this user agent string. So the user agent will include, it doesn't just say Chrome. I think Chrome's actually includes like Gecko, HTML, and then version number. So there's a lot of information within those user strings, those user agent strings. But I think outside of Axios for risky user agents, some non-standard ones, anything that comes from Python, I feel like it would be a non-standard user agent. So if you see those, I'd kind of key on those. Curl and wget as well, non-standard ways to grab HTTP content. So those could also be ones to keep an eye on as well. Granted, there are a lot of legitimate uses for all of these. So that's kind of the struggle is, mitigating those false positives between what's legitimate and illegitimate traffic with these user agents. Obviously, if you don't use them in your environment, all traffic can be considered illegitimate, but that's going to depend client to client.
Yeah. So in terms of mitigations, let's talk kind of like defensive strategies. I do want to talk about conditional access for a minute and share some stuff with that. But from your perspective, what are the go-to strategies? What can organizations do to kind of help defend and mitigate these session theft attacks, these man-in-the-middle attacks, these account compromises as a result of this kind of stuff?
Yeah, there's a few things I don't have in here that I think are important. One of the ones that I mentioned earlier was not being not allowing people outside of your organization to send messages to your users in Teams. I feel like
Yep.
is a huge mitigation. Another mitigation that I didn't put in here as well is DMARC. I'll get on my soapbox about DMARC again because DMARC will prevent spoofing of your email domain. So attackers won't be able to look as legitimate if they want to spoof your domain if you have DMARC in place. Obviously, they can spoof other domains and still send emails on behalf of them, but it'll at least protect your users from thinking somebody is sending on behalf of you.
Yep.
Implementing MFA is huge, specifically to prevent credential theft. MFA, is kind of bypass with session stealing. So for session stealing, limiting trust boundaries for those session tokens, making sure that they can't be used elsewhere outside of the application that they're intended to be used for.
Yep.
Setting time constraints for those tokens as well, making sure that they're not valid tokens for, let's say, 60 to 90 days at a time, making sure that users have to re-authenticate to get new tokens, on a regular interval, maybe not daily, maybe every other day or something of that nature, just to make sure that those tokens don't have long lifespans so that if they are stolen, they don't stay legitimate for an extended period of time.
Yeah, and I wanted to mention conditional access is probably a good opportunity to kind of throw this in.
True.
I sent a tweet out on May 6th of 2025 asking, what are the go-to conditional access policies that help mitigate or protect against stolen credentials? And a lot of great people chimed in with some really good information. And some of the stuff I wanted to call out was token binding. Where is it? Token protection and binding, which I believe is a newer feature from Microsoft to help protect against those session theft and token theft attacks. There's also, I think, something called like the Magnificent Eight or like the Magic Eight, right? The conditional access policies to block risky users, to enforce trusted locations, to ensure device compliance. So there's a lot of, you can block unapproved devices, legacy authentication, and there's a lot of interesting stuff that you can do with conditional access to make sure that a user logs in from a trusted device, like I said, to protect those tokens so that they can only be used from those specific devices. So a lot of really good resources there in that thread. I'll put a link in the comments of this episode or in the description of this episode for that Twitter post. But then also I wanted to give a shout out to Merrill Fernando, who is a product manager at Microsoft. He shared in this thread a really good resource. And I think it's 14 conditional access policies that you can deploy. And if you go to setup.cloud.microsoft.com, you sign in as an admin, you go to all guides and then deploy CA policies. And you select the zero trust category, and then you select all and deploy. And I guess it's 5 steps, like literally bang, 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 that easy. And it deploys a whole bunch of these conditional access policies for you. So definitely check that out. I think conditional access is going to continue to be a very strong, defensive control for those who are in the Microsoft 365 world, which is probably most everyone listening to this. So really good resource. Conditional access policies are great. And you definitely want to make sure that you have a good handle on those, because those can definitely protect with credential compromise, account takeovers, session theft, and all that. So really good resources there.
Yeah, and I think in terms of security for preventing against these attacks, like conditional access policies will cover you. It's just a matter of getting those implemented and implementing policies that fit with conditional access. So assigning all your end users company provision laptops that you monitor, or having a BYOD.
Yep.
So if you do bring your own device, it has to be monitored and be compliant. Things of that nature can help bolster security and prevent against these. Yeah,
and there's a couple other things I want to mention in the mitigation or prevention strategies. And one of those is monitoring, right? It's going to sound completely biased because we do monitoring, but I think having someone watching your back having somebody you trust, a vendor you trust that is watching the logs, they're looking for threats, they're hunting for suspicious activity in your environment, is extremely valuable and useful. It may seem really expensive, but I always equate it to the cost of not doing it, right?
Mm-hmm.
What is the cost of a data breach? What is the cost of an account compromise that goes unnoticed for 3 months, 6 months, et cetera? So I think, having somebody that's got your back, that you trust to help you monitor for these things is really, really valuable. And then also, doing your part as an IT department or a security leader or whatever, to teach users, right? Teach users the red flags. We as IT professionals or cybersecurity professionals are just as susceptible to these kinds of attacks as everybody else. We can be phished, we can be hacked. It may happen less than other users. So I always think about what's the difference between us and other users. It's just what we know, right? It's our experiences and our understanding of these things. I think you can train and teach people to look for some of these red flags, right? There's this weird human thing that we have, like the spidey sense. Like when something feels off, like we get a little bit of it, like anxiety inside of us. We're like, maybe that's not what it is. It says it is. And I think everybody has that to a certain extent. I think you can foster that. So training teaching users the red flags, and not punishing them when they make mistakes, right? I think is really important for developing a strong security culture, one that, encourages people to notify IT or security about threats when they see them, or potential issues when they see them, as opposed to just hiding them. So those are two things I wanted to call out from a mitigation strategy standpoint. If we're talking high level security strategy, I think those are really important things.
Yeah, and I think you make a really good point with fostering an environment where end users feel comfortable going to IT with these issues, because just from personal experience with engagements, when we compromise credentials, almost every time the end user is scared because their account's been hacked and they think they're in trouble, when really it's just like, it's a part of life at this point. Like, somebody is going to get hacked and they need to feel comfortable to go to IT to solve those problems proactively, rather than having to be reactive via an alert or something that comes from that user's account being compromised. Because people are hacked every day. Knowing what to do and how to handle it is super, super, super important.
And there's a big difference between a user account being compromised and a data breach, right? Very big difference. And developing playbooks, right? Incident response plans or playbooks to for you to use when these security events happen or these incidents happen is really important, right? Whether it's you responding or you have an MSP, you should have a very well ironed out, well defined process of what happens. Does the MSP call you? Do they disable the account first? You want to know what happens, in what order, what do you need to do? What actions do you need to take after you get notified by the MSP, et cetera? So you want to have clear plans, written plans, and you want to test them and drill them, go through them, do tabletop exercises to figure out, where are the, little nooks and crannies of information that you're missing, or the things that you weren't thinking about initially. So having a plan is really good. And the famous Mike Tyson quote is, everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face.
Yep.
That's why we practice, right? That's the whole reason for practice, is so you can get punched in the face, so you know how to respond, right? Or you learn how to dodge.
Yeah. I feel like understanding where to go to revoke sessions, especially in Microsoft, because that is something that you can do. If a user does get compromised, you can revoke the sessions that the hacker has, reset passwords, and then move on. And it's fine because you've caught it, you've been proactive with it. And in 5 minutes, an attacker isn't going to be able to divulge enough information from your environment to make a substantial impact, versus if you left them in there for a half hour. So just making that time frame of how long an attacker has access to that account smaller by your incident response plans greatly, greatly, greatly benefits you.
Yep. Good. Anything else that we want to kind of chat about with session hijacking, session theft? So I know we didn't go into depth on actual credential stealing. It was more so like session theft and token theft. So hopefully this serves as like a good introductory episode on this topic. And depending on, how people like this episode and kind of feedback received on this, we can dive deeper in this topic and talk about this a little bit more. I think it'd be cool to go into more about the conditional access policies to help mitigate this stuff. Be cool to talk about, more what these attacks look like in more depth. But anything else, Tyler, you wanted to mention?
No, but I think that's a great idea. I think if we did another episode dedicated to, security of this, like conditional access policies to implement from Microsoft that are low impact but high reward. So not a lot of setup involved, but a lot of benefit drawn back, I think be beneficial. I think we should do that.
Yeah. Yeah, we're definitely going to put that on the to-do list. So that's it. That's what we got for our episode today. Hopefully that was informative to you as kind of like an overview of this topic and some mitigation and defensive strategies that you can use for your organizations. If you got value from this episode, I would love a review on Apple Podcasts. If you would go and kind of like give us, 5-star, 4-star, 2-star, whatever it is you think we deserve, and just like a little comment about, the episode or the show in general, what the value you got. We'd really appreciate it. It helps us reach more people, kind of share what we have to offer for everybody else. So appreciate it. You can check us out on securit360.com or offsec.blog. New episodes every Friday, and we will see you next time. Thanks, everybody.